Well, Nico's going to get his credit today. I don't know where your classmates are. Okay, very good. I have to wait to be officially left out of the gates, but thank you all for coming. All right, sweet. Okay. Well, a few people know me and a few people don't. So my name is Barry Roll Carlsen, as it says up there. And this, basically, I was kind enough to be invited to jury the 28th Parkside Print Show, which used to be Small Print Show. I had to stop myself. Roberto and Colin were instrumental in making that happen, so I thank both of them, and I'll say more about that, I guess, in the show itself. But I also was invited to do a little hands-on workshop, which is in process in the print studio right now, which is, I think, working out to be pretty exciting. And Roberto was going to carry the mantle after I leave to print this, so that every participant gets a print from this collaborative litho that we started. I generally tailor this. I'm probably going to focus on YouTube because this is more toward career and balancing life and art in the way that I focused, and that's referring to the many hats to wear as an artist. In or outside of academia, you have a practice of your own that you try to carry forth, and you have a job and maybe a family that you're also having to balance these indices, and it's not an easy thing. It's that way with most any kind of job if you're going to do art. But what I ended up being my career path was sort of an unintentional one, and I became a graphic designer at the UW, and for 30 years I did that. Coming out of grad school, I applied to the obligatory 35 or more jobs, and I got one, and it was in Arkansas, and I decided I didn't want to take that job. So nothing against Arkansas. In a different time, I might have gone for it, but I just got married, and my wife was like, "Wait a minute, it's a 9-month job. You're gonna take this and then maybe be out of work, and I'm supposed to quit my job too." And we were living in a long distance relationship at a point, and I didn't think that at the advent of our marriage that might have been a smart thing to do. So I turned the job down, and I thought the next job cycle, the next year, I'll apply for these jobs that I really want, none of which I deserved to get because they were, for people with a longer resume than my own. So ended up being a preparator at what now is a MoCA for a couple of years, and then that was paying me very little, and so I got this design job offered to me, and I started that as a part-time designer. Through the course of 30 years, I think I worked full-time about half of that, and then I got some arts board grants from the state and reduced my job load to be 75% 3 days a week. So I'll just show you a little bit about, since this is less relevant to some others, but this is the kind of thing that I did when I was at the UW, and I designed the logo, the big W logo, and sports publications for the women's athletic department, logos for various parts of the university. If you ever got a parking ticket, that was not my fault, but that was one of my logos. The Ice Cube project is the South Pole. They have this gigantic, miles deep and miles wide neutrino detection thing, and so I did an Ice Cube logo for that, and some other logos outside the university, those bottom two. So I did work for the Wisconsin Magazine of History, which is a lot of fun. This is surfing in Sheboygan. Yeah. So things that I actually felt good about working for the UW, and I felt good about using some of my training to do things in typography and design and illustration, fun things. And I was kind of a jack of all trades for the illustrator in residence, so to speak, in our office. So they said, make something look like a comic book, and I didn't really have a personal style. It just kind of came out to be, I met the needs of the particular project. So I did at the time, 13 campuses for the 2-year schools. I was the designer that did all their recruitment materials. I did a thing for Doug Rosenberg in the art department, Screen Dance. I did work for On Wisconsin Magazine, the alumni magazine. I didn't design the magazine, but I was an art director there for a couple years after my boss retired, but then also did cover art. This is after they hired me back as a freelancer to do this cover. I did spreads inside. This is, so if you get the alumni magazine, you'll see work that may still, I haven't been contacted for a while yet, but did things that range from computer graphics to hand-painted illustrations, informational logos, and graphics for things scientific. This is a Mastodon illustration that was done for a scientific publication. It was about analyzing dung and determining by the dung, finding out that the fauna, the flora had changed in these times, and they were trying to analyze things in this region. This has been, every year or two, I'll get a request for this from some publication in the world. So they keep coming back to this Mastodon illustration, which I've used. And now I could occasionally get $100, $200 for. So I did cartoons. Yeah, in 100 different ways of illustrating, and I was just able to be flexible enough to do this, and had a lot of fun as well. So at 3 days, this is actually a monoprint. So I did a series of illustrations for this particular story by monoprinting. So I just got a litho press at that point, and I got to use the press, and it gave kind of an interesting effect. I did some work for a theater company in town, which my wife was a part of. And then Tom was in this show. Big Tent was an alumni show that I organized, and this is a catalog that was for that show. This is a couple of logos for the Vox Populi Print Collective, which I started and Roberto's a part of. This is our first catalog that was at the same gallery that the alumni show was at in New York. So I've used my logo skills, and it's something I'll probably continue to do, graphic design when called upon, but it's nothing I seek out actively. What I've been most, even at the point of graduating, most interested in is always continuing an artistic practice, and I've always had a studio space where I lived in a basement, an attic, a bedroom, or a garage in my backyard, which is now a house in my backyard that has art stuff in it. So this 20-year studio was a 2-car garage that I ran an illegal gas line out to, and I can't believe I didn't blow up the place or start it on fire. It was buried about this far under the ground, and it was spliced together with 3 different materials. And at 20 years, it was all good. So I have a factory in my backyard, and they were kind enough to allow me to use their access. So I had a backhoe come in. The guy who I hired to put the concrete pad in came in with the backhoe, and for $1,000 in the course of about an hour, the studio went down and it just became this empty spot. So I hired them, like I said, the concrete footing that was needed. I designed my new studio based on a 3-car garage, so it's 36 by 24, and you'll see it's bigger than my neighbor's house. It looked smaller on paper when I got it actually in person. And I trenched to the house, so I ran a sanitary line out, so it's plumbed. I have internet, electrical. This is really the only part that I hired. Then I had my son come home from college and some neighbors, and we did a barn raising. So everything I did was pretty much myself with the help of my son to frame it in, and I was all above board with the city, and I got it all done within the course of a couple months, and then I think I started in May, and I ended up being ready to work in it in October. So it's a studio that contains a printing area, a painting area here with a clear story, and my first mistake is something I'll explain about the stairway, which is a 9-foot ceiling, and I used the plan from a garage that has those pull-down stairs. but the geometry got all thrown off, and so I realized that they were not going to work. So I made these European alternating stairs that you'll see in a moment. And then that's my studio dog, Lucy. And then I have a printmaking area that I acquired an old Fuchs & Lang press, probably 120-year-old press, and set up that. Here's my stairway. It retracts when I need it to, but it's in the center of the space, and I really should have put it in the back. So this is looking down, working on a stone in process, and you could see the painting area up front. Everything's on wheels, so they all roll around. I've got many large tables that have files within them and other storage surfaces. Upstairs I have an office space and an exposure unit and some storage behind me, which is now full of crap. So here's just kind of an overview of the sort of paintings that I've become known, I guess, more for than some of my prints. I show in a few Wisconsin galleries and a couple of galleries outside of the state, but it sort of became a thing that I generated work based on my experiences of childhood and going up north. And I had a fishing boat for about 14 years, and when I was younger, I went up to Canada, and where my grandfather had a cabin in Minnesota. So these formative experiences kind of brought a lot of memories and nostalgia and kind of things about longing for personal relationships. And some of the landscape kind of stood in as kind of an avatar for people and places and memories and things. So they're traditional paintings. I never would have imagined I would make these kind of paintings when I got out of grad school. But they naturally became the thing that I did. And the paintings sell, which is something you get used to as an artist at a point. These are some more recent. These are chronologically kind of out of whack, but I'm just trying to keep them together for paintings, and then goes on to prints. These are some paintings that just came down at a show at the Able Contemporary Gallery in Stoughton. Oops, showed that one twice. This is about with the frame probably about 54 inches wide by 30 some tall. So that's about as big as I make paintings. They're not gigantic in any stretch. Tom Garver, who was the director of the Madison Art Center at the time, I had over and I showed him right out of grad school all these big kind of ostentatious paintings. And he kept going to the little paintings that were kind of my sketches and stuff in the side, and he'd say, this is where your strength is. You know, making small paintings that are intimate and sincere are more important than making big things that you have this opinion that they're belonging in some grand setting or museum or whatever. So I refocused, I think, a lot in trying to be less self-conscious about what I was doing and try to be closer to what I, in my mind at least, was trying to avoid, which was probably truer to myself in my heart. So these are little retablo paintings. They're all, roughly about yay big, about places and memories. And some of the outsides, I used kind of a printmakerly approach of applying materials and subtracting, or just layering of different paintings have different kind of approaches. But the fires were a thing that is gonna, I don't want to diminish or make you feel it. I burned my boat up once. I started it on fire, and it wasn't on purpose, of course, but it happened in my driveway. So the fire thing and burning boats is some metaphor that might apply to things outside of that experience, but that experience certainly added a, I don't know, it sparked my imagination to the idea of these bonfires and stuff. The boat started on fire on a sunny day that I was tying off some nylon ropes to a cover before I was going to go up north to fish. And I was actually going to be filmed by Wisconsin Public TV because they filmed me for a show called Gone Fishing, in which it still might be found on the station occasionally. talking about people, why they fished. And it was more about, the idea rather than my technique and all that stuff. It's just how you identify it in your life as a personal experience and an activity as a Wisconsinite. So I didn't think that the thing was still burning, and I thought I blew it out, and I didn't. I went up front, down the driveway, and came back up the driveway after raking some leaves because I was musky fishing, and it was going to be in the fall. And I see the smoke coming out from behind the house, and I was like, oh, somebody's barbecuing. And I walked back there, and the boat cover is just falling in pieces into the boat, and it had a carpeted deck and chairs and all that. Thankfully, not the gas tank wasn't in there, and neither was my tackle. But my wife laughed at me. She says, I'm just glad it wasn't me that burnt the boat. I also went to Norway, and I found interest in some of these unusual boat shapes that they use. They have a double prowed boat, and then apparently they tie off the ends, and if like a whaling experience or something, if you were drug along by the whale, you'd not bury the boat in the water, having a flat stern. So they have a double prow. So anyway, I guess looking at some of these, they range in subject, but they keep coming back to a certain place and a sense of nostalgia and longing, I suppose I'd say. And I acquired that printing press in about 2007, right after the studio was built, right around that time. And I started to think about how to integrate some graphic elements due to my design background and some of the things I could accomplish in printmaking, because when I was teaching, it was so sporadically. Since 1990, I taught in sabbatical replacement positions, litho. And every time I did it, I'd get excited about it, but then I didn't have a press, so it kind of went away. I started trying to make some paintings that had to do with merging some of the graphic qualities of the prints that I did, because when I started to be able to make prints on occasion, I thought to myself, who cares? I'm just going to make stuff I want to do instead of things that look like reproductions of my paintings. So I started to teach more regularly, and in 2015, when Jack Damer had decided to retire, I filled in there for 3 years and taught his classes. This is Don Colley. I printed a print for him. He's a Chicago artist when he came to visit. And then I decided to start curating some shows, and I got a few of those things under my belt. I don't know if that'll happen again. I put everything, Tom's is in here somewhere, smallish painting. So I hauled everything out to Brooklyn with the help of my wife. Never, ever do that again. I came into Brooklyn off the George Washington Bridge right at 5, and it was just a huge mess. We started the show. Oh, there's your piece. It's now in my studio. This was an artist trade. What it started the project by having a primary show where every artist put a piece in, and then they made like a sports betting thing. You had your first through 10th favorite, and if your first pick was available, you would take it, and then you had to go down the line if it got taken, and everybody got to choose a piece of artwork, and then walked home or drove home or flew home with a piece of artwork, and their piece of artwork went to some other individual. So then we went to Art Helix Gallery. This is the gallery in Brooklyn, and I installed the show and had a great time. Greg Nanny, he started Drive-By Press along with another student, Joseph Velasquez, and then some classmates of mine who lived and other Wisconsin-based artists that lived in Brooklyn at the time in New York. And then the show moved to the University of Wisconsin educational space, the gallery up the hill in Bascom Hall. We showed it there, so it traveled around. Having that press, like I say, allowed me to start doing my own work, and I was invited to a show at the Peninsula School of Art, and I made a series of larger lithos there, and started to think about, again, not tying these in, sort of a separate body of work from things that still have in my mind's eye the same content, but represented in a different form. This is a state print, and for those that don't know what a state print is you make a printing of the image. So there's a Xerox transfer of these. My dad was a bricklayer, and these cement block forms, and then I did a crayon drawing of him as a teenager in this cabin in Minnesota that his dad built way back in the 1920s. So he was pretty old when I showed up, and anyway, when you do a state print, you print the printing, and then you alter the stone in some way. This is a stone litho, to adjust its imagery and add to or subtract from that. So I completely obliterated it, so you could still see a ghosting of the image in the background of the first image you saw. And then I applied this second image on the top, and then adhered all these little silver dots. And then the third one, I ground away the majority of the image and added an additional thing called a monkey's fist, which is this shape here, and then another separate image applied on a separate piece of paper attached by a method called chincolé to the top portion. And then the third or fourth one was a complete graining of the stone, which, if you know anything about lithography, it's a chemical process, but if you etch a stone enough, there's actually a small relief that takes place. So I ground it down, and then that, in effect, inverted the image. So this inversion takes place of the man's face, my dad's face. And then I printed that, and then chincollated an entire sheet of paper with a new image on the top. My son happens to be named after my dad, so. And my dad's dad shoveled coal to come from Norway on a steamship to the United States. I visited Norway once in 2014, visited some Viking sites, some ruins, interesting things. So the Viking boat, or the Norwegian boat, kind of came into play in some of these prints. These are all lithos. This is after a trip to Mexico with our kids. I made some attempt at trying to bring some paintings into a different way of thinking. And I don't know if I fully pushed this angle too much further than these three pieces, but they started to work into some lithos. And this is one of the reasons I like printmaking is you can make multiples, so that means you could have objects that you could distribute and trade, and they're not precious like a painting might be. But the other thing that the print process does is allows you to make variations upon the multiple. So this is a piece that has 20 different pieces of paper, all generated from this single image, and each print was a unique individual print that was different, and I would approach the press like I would a painting, where I would experiment and use different inks, stencils, maybe hand apply painting techniques to the prints after or in between printing runs, but the press was acting as a drawing tool for me. So I'll just rip through these. So I used stencils and different colored inks, and each one allowed me to build off of that from the matrix that I was using, build off the image in ways that I would have had to recreate from scratch if I was doing a painting. So sometimes I just would run a run and I'd look at it and I'd react to it, and I'd come to it the next time and make unexpected decisions and have some of the spontaneous things that transpired through the course of printing drive an idea. And it was a kind of a discovery process, which I liked a lot. This is another case where this single image was handled in different ways, and then obliterating the stone, so just that ring is left. This was some small prints. I started to use some of the scroll that, if you know how to transfer images, sometimes you use this transfer process where you'd have this negative drawing created like carbon paper, and I inverted that and started to make these kind of scratchy images. These are some prints that were made by recycling and scavenging old printing plates from other projects and just printing them without a lot of knowledge about their outcome. I just would print them and I'd make judgments based on the results. So each one of these, again, was an experiment, and one that I could say that I couldn't have come up with without the process influencing my images. So I guess in this stage in my life, I was less concerned about these having any relevance to the paintings. I just thought, I have a parallel track, or a divergent track. And the work that I was doing, I just felt engaged with in a way that I hadn't with the paintings. And I still make paintings. I have several in my studio right now that'll be shown this summer at a show. And then in the fall, I have to make those traditional paintings too. And I'm fine with having both. There's other artists in my understanding, like Lucas Samaras, who had kind of wide background of different techniques that he used and different image making processes that resulted in different looking artwork. So here's another case of this is one image that I use different stencils to create different results. Likewise here. This is a straight up addition to image. And this was done for a portfolio. So these I still can print, 60 or however many is needed and make them all look the same. This is a familiar image, I think. Most people have seen posters built off of this. So here's a print that I did, and I went, just wasn't happy with it. So I completely took a different track. It's the same stone based on the same image, and I just completely drove it in a different direction. This is a very tiny shared print. This is a print that I've made I felt pretty good about. This is probably the closest I've made to an amalgam of those traditional paintings with some of the graphic qualities of some of the prints. And I think I have room to grow here. Whether the prints and paintings will ever completely be the same, I don't know. We'll see. But I had good feedback, and I felt good about the way that these have worked. Well, they're people that I have chosen these photos to represent, but they're not necessarily photos of, some of those photos, like the kids in the ocean from the back, were pictures of my kids. Some of these are more found photos that I've used as stand-ins for those. Then I also took some pieces that were similar to maybe some of those that I showed you, very abstracted, and printed raw materials and then reassembled those in collage form to create some new effects. And then I also scavenged some prints, cut them, and reassembled them for a show, which I felt, I was very happy with the results of these. So you could see some of the common elements, obviously. And then I made a couple, yeah, did you have a question?
Yes, about previous site, how'd you get the whole use as a cash shadow?
Yeah, I just had this idea once where the shadow is an absence of the subject, and so I just eliminated the shadow area and made that the background. You'll see that in a couple of other examples. They're all derived from this print. The offshoots of the edition weren't up to the edition. So I thought as a motif of that positive negative shape being kind of a representation of something more psychological, I guess. So it was just a choice of eliminating. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye. So it was just, these are all just drawn images, so they look like that looks like it was cut out, but these are all just reassembled prints, some hand painting on them. This is a case where I tried to put that exact thing into a painting format, so these are small oil paintings. Then the thing that I guess I'm doing outside of my own body of work is also running a print collective, and that's something that I was inspired to do by a friend who owned that gallery, Art Helix Gallery, and we started this together, but I basically run it. He has a bigger umbrella that he has other groups within called SHIM, and it's the notion of collective action having a way of driving forward individual opportunity. So we created this 60-member show, which the catalog is, actually it's in the print shop if you wanted to look at it, at his gallery in 2017. Some of the members. And it showed around in different places. It went to Basel, Scope Art Fair in Basel, and showed there. It went to Berlin to Toolbox Gallery, which is a Finnish gallery in Berlin, and showed there. It went to DC, Superfine Art Fair. So we've been trying art fairs. I just came back from Austin in an art fair, and this went to Los Angeles too, and ran a booth down there right before the pandemic kind of threw everything off the rails. We had a show at the 224 Gallery in Port Washington, just up the road. And then we had a members exhibit that year in Able Contemporary Gallery. And there's Roberto's piece back, big piece here. Yeah.
What was your process for getting these shows and all these different?
I reach out to people. People sometimes come to me, and I'll just pose a scenario where I've got this collective and I need a space to show, and it's worked out to be they don't always say yes, but UW Oshkosh, where I showed this series of work from Devil's Dictionary portfolio, which we all as artists got to take a piece of and have a portfolio of everyone else's work, and then some other fresh work from that. Sometimes somebody will come to me, like this little gallery in town came to me, and it's a gallery night gallery. It doesn't exist except for those gallery night events, so we do things. Wauwatosa at Gallery 2622, they invited me, or they invited the group to show there, but I did reach out to them and solicited the show. And then we showed during the SGCI conference last year, about a year ago, at Overture Gallery in Madison. And I thought that show looked great. And that's the last slide I have. I don't have any slides of the Austin Gallery, the booth rather, at Print Expo in Austin, but I just came back from that a couple weeks ago. So I don't know, I mean, pretty light crowd, so if anybody, please ask me more than one question if you have it. Yeah. Sure.